In this guide, we're going to be taking a look at all the different enemy types and bosses in Cronos: The New Dawn. So just to add a bit of context into why the monsters in this game look like they've been hanging around inside a nuclear reactor, we've been zipped back to an alternate reality of 1980s Poland, where shit's really hit the fan and a mysterious event called the Change just sorta happened. Which is a much more pleasant way of saying everyone got infected and morphed into gooey lumps of mozzarella cheese. We assume the role of a mysterious space woman called Traveler ND3576, who's dressed like Soviet Union Mysterio and sorta gives off those robotic Mark Zuckerberg vibes. She's been sent back in time to extract essences of important people and do all the sort of things you'd expect to do in a sci-fi nerd's wet dream. This is the way. I mean, such is our calling. Expect loads of ominous red lights, blobbified humans plastered all over the walls, random cats getting themselves stuck in rooms, and of course, a whole bunch of ugly creatures with a strong desire to merge with each other. Kinda like a typical Friday night at your local dive bar. The idea of slaying orphans might sound a little bit dark on paper, but these ones probably aren't the type to start breaking out in song and dance to Food Glorious Food. Then again, you never know. The Change did the human race a pretty big dirty. Most of the enemies you'll face in the game come in the form of twisted amalgamations called orphans. Mutants generated by infected biomass, which is basically the product of people melting down and merging into each other like human omelettes. The Doppelganger is the most common type of orphan, and although it does retain quite a lot of its humanistic characteristics, maybe a few too many characteristics, it's also going to slap you around with an arm that looks like a pile of giant earthworms having a wild orgy. As far as enemies go in this world, these are the normal guys, which is a pretty weird way to label something with a bunch of extra heads and body parts bulging out of places they probably shouldn't be. These guys stand on two legs and have the general body structure of a typical person, arse crack included, but that's sorta where it ends when it comes to comparing these things to the people they once were. Despite seeming like a fairly generic enemy type on the face of it though, doppelgangers come in several different forms, and they've got a few sneaky tricks up their fleshy sleeves to make encounters a lot more chaotic than they really need to be. They're also very hostile with some serious anger management issues. Though to be fair, if a random face pops up on my shoulder and my knob just decided to vanish, I'd be quite annoyed too. They also think it's really funny to wait behind doors and troll you with jump scares every 5 bloody minutes. I mean, come on guys. Aside from the standard doppelganger, you're also going to get chased by some gored up versions with a load of squirming red tentacles trying to wriggle their way out of their butchered neck holes. These runner variants are generally more gung-ho with faster movements and an all-around ballsier temperament. Though being Mr. Confident isn't always going to play into this guy's favour, being one of the punier orphans on the list with barely any sort of muscle power to back itself up. 10 out of 10 for bravery though. I guess you could say these runners are the lesser forms, and being a bit quicker is just about all they've really got going for them. Traveler ND3576 couldn't punch her way out of a wet paper bag, but those weak ass right hooks can still be enough to finish these guys off if they've already been softened up a bit first. Which is a good thing to know if you're low on bullets, which is basically 90% of the time playing the game. Whenever you see a doppelganger with a bunch of extra arms poking out of its back, well, that's a telltale sign that you've encountered a spitter, along with the fact that it likes to spit. These pesky things prefer to hang back a bit away from all the action, so kind of the opposite to the runner variants, and instead of charging over with that noodle arm lashing around, they're generally going to keep some distance and fire some nasty acidic phlegm projectiles at you instead. Because of all the green gunk just flowing out of their manky gobs, you've got to be careful of the vomit puddles they like to splash around on the floor. Always the standard with enemies that puke out deadly streams of corrosive bile. We've seen this many times before. And I guess this also acts as an area denial tool to prevent you from getting up close and using melee against them, which in this game is usually a bit of a dumb idea, let's be honest. But what about the big beefy variants, because every game's got to have one of those. Well, you might not be too surprised to see that Cronos does indeed have some chunkier doppelgangers, which are basically much taller, fatter meat monsters with extra power and extra padding. These guys are definitely there to cause you some problems, and they're probably one of the last things you want to see being birthed out by a wall minge. Mainly because they hit like a freight train, and because they'll soak up even more of that carefully salvaged ammo of yours. Ammo that's probably taken a hell of a lot of bloody time to actually find. Generally best to shoot those explosive canisters and blow them up to make life a tad less stressful, though just be prepared for an even tougher fight than usual. These chubby dudes might be a bit on the dozy side, but they're certainly not going to go easy on you with those arm slams. Oh, and just be extra wary around the ones with rock-like plating covering their bodies. Not only can these guys charge over with brutal ramming attacks, but they can also smash the ground to generate waves of rubble to come flinging up from the floor too. As if the normal brutes weren't already savage enough. So if you know anything about this game, then you probably already know about the whole merging mechanic, which was kinda hard not to notice if you saw any of the trailers. For anyone who's not aware of it, basically the infected people in Cronos have all got the urge to merge, sort of giving them extra power through unification. Every doppelganger type you've seen so far has the ability to transform into an angry pile of spaghetti bolognese, which is a very bad thing for you if there happens to be another dead orphan lying around nearby. They can soak up their fallen brethren to become stronger, deadlier, and spikier, and even be able to transform themselves into totally different variants, albeit ones that are going to give you a much rougher time. For example, if you let one of the runners merge, it'll regrow its head and turn into a normal doppelganger, though a normal doppelganger might turn into an armor-plated spitter, and if it's covered in spines and got glowing eyes, then the orphans already become a stronger variant, and you got to aim for the squishy parts unprotected by its hardened skin. The more times you let them merge, then the more likely they're going to become an issue, with the top dogs being extra feisty, even having a unique attack that lets them crush the living crap out of you with a bunch of weedy chest tentacles. Thankfully, just like most living things, they don't like being set on fire, so you can put a stop to their devious plans before they come into motion by using your flamethrower to burn the dead bodies on the floor, essentially taking away their fuel and shutting down the monster buffet before it even begins, like setting Gordon Ramsay loose in a Wetherspoon's kitchen. All that nasty human biomass hasn't exactly made the place very easy to navigate through, especially in areas where a bunch of green danger pimples have decided to pop up, waiting for you to pass on by so they can get all excited with themselves and self-destruct. You've got to pay very close attention to where you're going, just in case there's a sneaky one hiding out of plain sight, which more often than not, there usually is. With bullets being such a precious commodity, it's usually best to do the good old dash in, dash out maneuver, causing the blobs to explode without harming your health or your ammo reserves. But because some of these snotballs have decided to grow a few limbs, they're not always going to be quite as easy to avoid, especially when the walls suddenly start giving birth to a whole bloody creche of them. Probably no surprise that these things are going to drag themselves towards your location, and it's probably no surprise that they're going to explode into puddles of acid as soon as they get an opportunity to cause some damage to you. Most of the time they're easy enough to deal with, but you will need to be extra vigilant around the spiky variants, found a little bit later on in the game, as these little buggers have the ability to pounce over distance like exploding frogs, pretty much rendering the whole dash in dash out trick completely useless. It turns out that some of the biomass spread out all over the walls is actually still alive and kicking. Well, maybe not literally kicking down to its legs being fused together and glued to a solid surface, but it's still got a bunch of other nasty limbs to wave around and make itself look absolutely horrible instead. Made even worse by its entire body being split open, with a bunch of fingers and spikes growing along the edges. Kinda like a Venus flytrap, if it was made from people banished to the arse end of hell. Just like those green wall blobs, these freaky things can be seen hanging around having a pretty miserable day, waiting for someone to wander on by so they can open themselves up and let all of the stringy meat tentacles inside come out to give them a big fat cuddle. Not something you really want to happen, as it'll strangle the living crap out of you. So just like an annoying drunken colleague at a work Christmas party, it's typically best to dodge these things to avoid the inevitable hug. Or better yet, shooting them does a pretty fine job too. Probably best not to do that at the Christmas party though. The problem is with these jaw guys is that they like to chill out in some of the most awkward areas, sitting around in dark corners and hiding away in your blind spots, usually forcing you to tread extremely carefully and look out for any wall gaps and windows to give you an open sightline, so you can blast them away with some of those guns. Okay, let's crank it up a notch, because our next enemy type is literally a human centipede. Just like the other messed up freaks in Cronos, these things are made up of a whole concoction of grisly bits and pieces from human anatomy. They're covered in heads, shoulders, knees and toes, and they're probably about as disturbing as spliced up meat people get. Especially when you notice the poor bugger with all the hands growing out of his gob. Though aside from taking body horror to the next level and being able to smash everyone in a game of Twister, these centipedes act in a very different way to most of the other orphans you'll find in the New Dawn. Having all those long gangly limbs lets them scurry around quickly along the walls and ceilings, like creepy meat spiders. And because their bodies are full of that corrosive fluid, they'll typically use high up vantage points to shower toxic death on you from above, firing concentrated puke balls over range, or by spewing up everywhere to create harmful puddles on the floor. The centipede's skittish nature generally gives them a much more defensive attack style, so don't expect these things to be quite as gung-ho as the other guys, as they'll often prefer to hang back and pepper you with vomit blobs over distance, jumping around the place to avoid being blasted. Just like the doppelgangers though, you can also find merge variants of these centipedes too, with those spooky glowy eyes, a body full of spikes, and an overall feistier attitude, unsurprisingly making them tougher enemies to take down. with these guys even able to pounce on you over distance, generally attacking their victims in a much more aggressive manner. Well, what in the Ouroboros virus do we have here? Looks like we're onto our first real boss variant of the game, which just so happens to be a writhing mass of black sludgy noodles, known as the Unmerged One. It's a very different monster to the typical orphans plaguing the area. It might have one of those stretchy earthworm arms, but it's also got a whole bunch of other devious tricks too, being able to melt down and re-emerge elsewhere in the building, send out floor-crawling projectiles which hone in on your position, create hazardous areas on the ground to slow down your movements, and even try to strangle you to death with those gnarly tendrils, in a similar way to being caught by one of those jaw creatures. With all that said, it's still a pretty typical survival horror fight, being a monster covered in bright orange weak spots. Though to give us a bit more of a challenge, you've got to burn away the tendrils covering them up first. Obviously, your flamethrower is going to come in handy here, but because you can barely carry any fuel for that flamethrower, you're going to need to bait the monster into walking near explosive canisters, and blow the bugger up as it plods on by. Just when you thought the orphans couldn't get any more disturbing, they get more disturbing. There's a good reason why our next boss variant is called the Terror, and it's a reason that doesn't even really need explaining. This thing is basically a rampaging mass of angry flesh made from all sorts of human biology fused together. It's got body parts in its limbs, limbs in its body parts, and a face that's got a pretty nasty case of piles. Because there's just so much biomatter involved here, this makes the Terror a whole lot bigger than all the other monsters we've seen so far. And obviously, being such a bulky beast, most of its moveset consists of trying to flatten you into the concrete floor, being a big stompy bullet sponge that you'll definitely want to keep beyond arm's length. Another reason why you'd probably want to keep some distance is down to it having a big fleshy scorpion tail to slap you around with too. There might not be any weak spots to uncover this time, but there's a hell of a lot of chipping away to do to the boss's health instead. A little bit later on in the game, you'll also encounter a different variant of the Terror, with this one trading that whip-like tail in for a mouthful of corrosive snot. This thing is, once again, another bunch of unlucky people that have been turned into a walking meat casserole. Only this creature's going to rely a lot more on ranged acid attacks, in between it smashing the floor like a disgruntled chimp. And so you could expect it to combine a lot of the attacks from the last guy with the similar sort of vomit spewing tricks as those pesky centipede creatures. But what do you get when you combine both the Unmerged One with the Terror? Well, no big surprise, because you'll get the Unmerged Terror. Basically a big sludgy tarred up version of the normal one, which has now got access to a few of those tendril tricks from the first boss fight. Being a big stompy monster that can't be injured unless set on fire first, automatically gives the Unmerged Terror a pretty big advantage over you. And the fact that you need to take this creature on in a really dark network of claustrophobic tunnels doesn't exactly help you out very much here either. Especially with this thing looking like a symbiote that's latched onto a friggin' elephant. Because this thing's so bloody big and practically takes up all the space in the corridor, there's only really one way that you can run, and that's in the opposite direction. Not too tricky to do while it's charging around throwing tantrums, until it decides to melt down into a puddle of vines only to re-emerge somewhere else. Fire and explosives are once again going to be your best friend here, burning away that grimy goop to reveal those blastable weak spots. And although the danger levels have definitely been hyped up a bit, at least you've got some experience taking on similar monsters leading up to this fight. Okay, who's ready for the next boss? Gonna see a show of hands? After hearing a spooky voice in your head, you'll be led to an abbey, where you'll find a big creepy arm monster chilling out at the back of the hall. This is Mother Eliza, a crazy nun who's presumably merged with all of her holy followers, probably thinking that the change is some sort of religious event organised by God, which is obviously a load of bollocks, and if this was God's plan then I definitely wouldn't be listening to him. The entire abbey is covered in fleshy biomatter, and there's a whole bunch of orange blisters sprouting out all over the place too. So there's only one thing that springs to mind here, and that's to go on a bit of a popping spree. Eliza's not very thrilled about you doing that, of course, and she's going to keep puking out tons of corrosive phlegm to make the arena a lot more hazardous. Though most of the fight mainly consists of bursting blobs, dodging floor tentacles, trying not to get puked on, and dealing with all the headless bastards that keep popping up in the room every couple of seconds. There's a fair bit of multitasking involved, but the job's a pretty simple one. Well, up until the crazy bitch starts flooding the entire room with acid, forcing you to manipulate the environment to create a safe platform to stand on, massively narrowing down the area you've got to move around, thus making the horde of angry monsters rushing you from the front all the more awkward to keep at bay. Popping pimples becomes a hell of a lot trickier to do when you're distracted by an army of endlessly spawning freaks. But once you get rid of all the weak spots, and you manage to destroy the central blister which appears on Eliza's body, then you'll be able to prove her that merging into a gigantic hand monster probably wasn't the best idea. it's the final boss spoilers, you know the drill by now. If you don't want to know anything about the last guy, then it's probably the end of the road for you. So it turns out that the Warden, who's sort of like a mysterious ally throughout most of the game, is actually a collective traveller known as the Pathfinder. Someone with the unique ability to open up time rifts and use that power to carry out his missions. He went back in time and became obsessed with a woman named Veronica, and instead of extracting her essence, which was all part of the original plan, he tried to find a way to save her instead. Our main protagonist, Traveller ND3576, well, she's actually a vessel carrying Veronica's essence, an experiment conducted by the Pathfinder to try and keep her alive after death. But let's just say that our protagonist isn't exactly a carbon copy of Veronica, well, with the whole robotic demeanour and all. And so with the Pathfinder feeling like he's been catfished, he decided to zip back to the past to try and start all over again. Anyway, he's buggered around with time too much, and someone should probably stop him. So after following the Pathfinder and confronting him, you'll kick off a big fight in a snowy arena. Being the final boss and all, it's one of those battles that takes place over multiple different stages, though he's kind enough to ease you into the fight in a gentle manner, because the first stage just consists of him teleporting around the place and swiping at you with his magic sickle. Nothing too crazy just yet. He starts to ramp things up a bit in phase 2, after time warping you both to a new location, keeping those sickle attacks up and being slightly more aggressive with them, but also introducing a new move where he launches electrified balls at you over distance too, an attack that you'll need to sidestep or block off using the many rundown cars littered around the area. It isn't really until the third phase until the Pathfinder starts to flex his muscles and take things a bit more seriously, zipping you both to another location with a bunch of gravity panels floating around the edges. It's probably obvious what comes next, and you're gonna need to use these panels to avoid the boss's charged up energy blasts, lighting up the main floor space and ruining your day if you're still hanging around down below. You can use gravity to try and avoid his attacks during this phase, which you're gonna need to do at certain points, though apart from using big energy blasts to make you jump around, expect to be familiar with the rest of his moveset. The final phase, and easily the trickiest one of the bunch, takes us back to our original spot. Only this time you'll notice that a load of anomalies have popped up around the perimeter. This isn't just to make the fight look a bit more dramatic, as you've got to use those anomalies to shift the big piles of rubble, before the boss blasts you away with one of those massive explosions. There's no gravity pads around to save your ass this time, so that's the only way you're going to be able to avoid them. The Pathfinder's going to use a lot of similar moves as before, waving that sickle around and going a bit crazy with those energy attacks, though he's also going to chain those attacks together a lot quicker too, giving you very little error as he phases around the room, also being a bit of an awkward bugger to actually hit back, due to those bloody teleportation tricks. Though when the last shot finally connects and knocks the dude down to the floor, you can give yourself a big pat on the back and treat yourself to one of the game's multiple endings. So if you want to see more nasty monsters in other survival horror games, then why not check out the playlist on the screen right now. And because pretty much everyone in the world compares this game to Dead Space, I've gone and thrown the link up for my guide on that too, if you want to check that one out next. Special thanks to all my channel members for the support, and a big thanks to you for watching this video to the end.